Prelude to the Revolution. Navigation Acts of 1651 were aimed at the Dutch and required all trade between England and the colonies to use an English vessel. Certain items were shipped to only England. These would include sugar, tobacco, cotton, wool, indigo, and ginger. Sultry and neglect trades were regulations for the colonists that were laxly enforced as long as the colonists obeyed British command. Proclamation of 1763 was made by the British Crown after the French and Indian War. It was intended to conciliate the Native Americans. The Sugar Act was created by Britain, and their goal was to stop the smuggling of sugar and molasses from the French and Dutch. They also wanted to increase the revenue in order to fund the British Empire's responsibilities after the French and Indian War. The Sons of Liberty was formed by the colonies in the summer of 1765 to oppose the Stamp Act. They used petitions, assemblies, and propaganda, but sometimes resorted in violence against the British. The Stamp Act was the first preliminary attempt to raise revenue. Taxed all of the colonies' commercial and legal papers, newspapers, pamphlets, cards, almanacs, and dice. The colonists upheld their right as Englishmen to be taxed with their consent through their own representatives. The Quartering Act required colonial authorities to provide food, drink, quarters, fuel, and transportation to British forces in their towns. Passed in response to the increased Empire defense, and was greatly resented in New York because it had the largest number of reserves. Boston Massacre. On March 5, 1770, British officers were surrounded by a mob of colonists. One officer shot his gun in fear and confusion, leading other soldiers to fire. British Army soldiers killed 5 male civilians and injured 6 others. 8 officers were arrested. Gaspee Affair. 8 boatloads of Rhode Islanders boarded the Gaspee, overpowered the crew, disabled her commander, and set fire to the ship. The raiding party was never punished. The Tea Act. In 1770, all of the Townshend Acts had been lifted but the one on tea. The Tea Act rearranged regulations so that the East India Company could pay the Townshend Act and still undersell its competitors. The North Administration hoped to reassert Parliament's right to direct revenue taxes on the colonies. These shipments became a symbol of taxation tyranny to the colonists. Boston Tea Party. Colonists dressed as Mohawk Indians dumped 342 chests of tea belonging to the British East Indian Company into the Boston harbor. Colonists were protesting both the tax on tea and the monopoly of the East Indian Company. The Intolerable Acts. 4 punitive measures made by the British Parliament in retaliation for the acts of the colonial defense. The main forces came after the events of the Boston Tea Party. These would include the Boston Port Bill, which closed the city's harbors until restoration was made after destroying the tea, the Massachusetts Government Act, which removed the colony's charter, reducing it to a level of Crown colony, the Administrative Justice Act, aimed at protecting British officials charged with capital offenses during law enforcement, and the Fourth Act included new arrangements for housing British troops in occupied American dwellings. These acts were an attempt to reimpose strict British control over the American colonies. The First Continental Congress was a body of delegates who spoke and acted collectively for the people of the colony states, which would later become the United States of America. They met in September 1774 and again in May 1775.